The smell of coffee had barely filled the room when Rowan stepped through the doorway, his shoes clicking sharp against the tile. He wore a navy suit, too crisp for a casual visit, a folder tucked under his arm like a trophy. I set the mug down and braced myself. I had the paperwork drawn up, he said, sliding into the chair opposite me as if the seat had always been his. It's fair. I grew up in this store. I deserve 45%. The folder landed with a dull thud between us. His hand lingered on it, almost daring me to open it. I didn't. Instead, I pulled open the drawer at my side and lifted out the original deed, its edges softened by years of careful storage. I placed it squarely on the table. The only signature across the bottom was mine. Rowan's jaw tightened, but his eyes didn't waver. Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You know I've put in time here. All those weekends. Stacking shelves when you were 12 doesn't buy ownership. I cut in, keeping my tone level. Beside me, my lawyer. Mr. Calder cleared his throat, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. The sound was quiet, but it carried weight. Rowan shifted the bravado, slipping just enough for me to see the boy who once begged for gas money, not the man pretending to be a partner. You've already shown these papers to suppliers, haven't you? I asked. His silence was answer enough. I leaned back, folding my hands together. I remembered the long nights sanding tables until my fingers cracked the years when I went without health insurance just to keep the lights on here. Rowan had seen the storefront open and bustling, but he hadn't been there when it was only me and a stack of borrowed tools. This store is mine, I said, finally sliding the deed back into the drawer. And no document you wave in front of me changes that. Rowan's lips pressed into a thin line. He gathered his folder slowly, as if the weight of it had doubled, and left without another word. I turned to Mr. Calder, already knowing this was only the beginning. When Rowan's footsteps faded down the hallway, I stayed seated, fingers resting on the drawer that held the deed. The silence of the break room brought me back to another kind of silence, the kind that filled my apartment 25 years ago, when the only sound at night was the hum of the refrigerator and the scratching of pencil against paper as I drew my first furniture sketches. I was 38 then, fresh out of a marriage that had bruised more than my skin. I had nothing but an old van, a rented one-room place with leaky windows, and the determination not to end up begging anyone for survival. Craigslist was my lifeline. I hunted down pallets left behind, warehouses, wood-scarred and blackened nails rusted deep. I hauled them home, broke them down piece by piece, and sanded until my hands bled. Rowan was just a boy small enough to curl into the passenger seat with a blanket as I drove through town before dawn to deliver tables I had stained hours earlier. He'd sleep while I unloaded chairs, sometimes stirring when a door slammed, asking groggily if we could get pancakes. Most times, I couldn't afford them. When his dentist said he needed braces, I opened the jewelry box and sold the engagement ring I once believed meant forever. Later, when tuition bills came, I told the doctor I'd put off my own procedure until next year. Next year never came. Those choices stacked up like lumber in the back of the shop. One day, one decision, one sacrifice after another, until there was a storefront with my name on it. Quinn Craft Furniture. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was my body, my years, my grit carved into every surface. I sometimes wonder if Rowan ever really saw it, or if he just remembers the showroom after the lights were bright and the register was ringing. He never saw the bruises on my palms from hammering nails, or the times I skipped meals so he could have cleats for soccer. That's why watching him claim ownership today cut so deep. He knows only the finished store, not the nights it almost collapsed before it began. And I know this fight is far from over. 3 weeks earlier, I sat at Rowan's dining table, the smell of roast chicken and garlic bread heavy in the air. His wife Celeste had insisted on hosting Sunday lunch. The table gleamed with polished silverware and a centerpiece of flowers too extravagant for a casual meal. I should have known then that this wasn't about family time. Rowan lifted his glass. First, the practiced smile of a man performing for an audience. To Mom, he said, standing tall, the queen of craftsmanship. Without her, none of us would know what hard work really means. Everyone clapped politely, and I forced a smile, though the words felt rehearsed. Celeste leaned closer to me as glasses clinked. "You must be thinking about retirement soon," she said, voice honeyed but sharp at the edges. "It's such a blessing Rowan is ready to take more off your shoulders." She gave my arm a squeeze as if she were offering comfort, but I heard the message loud and clear. I busied myself with the mashed potatoes, trying to ignore the tightening in my chest. Conversation moved quickly, laughter spilling across the table, until one of their friends, a realtor I barely knew, leaned in with a grin. "Rowan tells me about his expansion plans. A new showroom, maybe even a franchise. Exciting stuff." I froze fork, halfway to my mouth. "Expansion plans," I repeated, but Rowan jumped in, smoothly brushing my words aside with a wave. "Just ideas, Mom. You know me always dreaming big." The others laughed, but I felt the ground shift beneath me. He wasn't joking. His wife's comments, the staged compliments, even the guest list, it all clicked into place. They weren't celebrating me. They were rehearsing a story, one where I had already stepped aside. I smiled, thinly said nothing, and let the conversation move on. But inside, I knew this lunch wasn't about family at all. It was a dress rehearsal for the ambush that would come later, the one that started with a folder dropped on my break room table. Back in the present, I sat across from Mr. Calder in his office, the stack of papers Rowan had left behind, lying unopened between us. The blinds filtered the morning light, striping the folder in pale gray. Mr. Calder adjusted his glasses and tapped the cover. "He's already circulated copies of this draft agreement," he said. "Vendors, a couple of suppliers, even an insurance contact. Claims he's stepping in as co-owner." My stomach clenched, but I kept my voice steady. "And they believed him. He leaned on your name," Calder said. "On family ties. People assumed you'd given him authority. That's the danger." He slid another document toward me. "This is the deed, original, unchallenged, and notarized. It's ironclad. But perception can chip away at truth if you let it go unchecked." I ran a finger over the embossed seal. The same one I'd clutched the night I first signed it. Heart pounding with the fear that no one would ever buy from me. That piece of paper had been the only proof I had of ownership, and now my own son was trying to rewrite it. Calder leaned back. "There's more. Financial traces. The $14,000 you loaned him. Not a cent has come back. Yet he listed it to a bank officer as an investment from the family business. He's using your sacrifice as his equity." I felt heat rise in my chest. 14,000 the braces, the rent delays, the skipped treatments, all shoved into a pit so he could claim footing he never earned. I had called it help. He had renamed it ownership. Calder closed the folder. "The law's on your side. But the longer he talks, the more damage he does." I nodded, my resolve hardening. Rowan wasn't just testing boundaries, he was rewriting my story in his favor. And if I didn't act, people might start believing it was his to tell. I left Calder's office with the deed safe in my bag, the weight of it, a reminder that I couldn't allow silence to stand in for consent. The walk back from Calder's office left me heavy with memory. I kept thinking about all the times I had waited for acknowledgement that never came. My parents, for one. When I signed the lease on the first storefront, I called them eager to share the news. They said the drive was too far, that maybe they'd visit when it was more established. They never did. The picture I took that day, me in front of peeling paint and a crooked sign, was the only record. Years later, when Rowan graduated from college, I catered his party with food bought from my store's first real profit. I told myself it was a circle closing, that his milestone could be celebrated by the business that had carried us both through. He stood on the porch that night, surrounded by friends laughing while they ate on tables I had built. No one asked who made them. No one looked my way. I smiled through it, proud for him, but it stung even then. The grand opening of Quincraft was supposed to be different. I planned it carefully. Ribbon across the door, a few speeches, a modest spread of pastries. Rowan came late as usual, trailed by his friends. They took selfies under the sign posed on the showroom chairs and filled the space with noise. Not once did he introduce me as the owner. I stood there, hands folded, watching strangers take credit with their laughter, while I remained invisible in the background. That invisibility had become a pattern. Rowan treated the store as a convenience, a backdrop for his moments, never as an inheritance of effort or sacrifice. Now, with forged contracts and bold claims, it was clear he had grown to believe my work was his by default. I returned to the store that evening, walking past the polished glass doors and into the quiet hum of saws shutting down for the night. My staff waved goodbye, unaware of the storm brewing beyond the walls. I watched the lights flicker off one by one, knowing the time had come to face Rowan directly. Rowan showed up unannounced just after closing. The store smelled faintly of varnish, the workshop quiet except for the hum of cooling machinery. He didn't storm in this time, no folder slapped on the table, no clipped demands. Instead, he leaned against the counter with a smile that reminded me of when he was a boy trying to charm his way out of trouble. "Mom," he began, voice low, and practiced, "I don't want this to get ugly. Let's make a deal. I'll step back from the lawsuit talk if you give me 30% of the store and a proper leadership title. COO, something like that. It's only fair. I mean, look at everything we've built together." I stayed still, letting him think the words carried weight. He mistook my quiet for hesitation, pressing on with more confidence. "You'd still be in charge, of course. I just want recognition. A seat at the table. Investors like seeing continuity. Family legacy, it's good for the brand." He had rehearsed that pitch, I could tell. His hands moved as if he were addressing a boardroom, not his mother, who had once sold her wedding ring to pay his dentist. I let him finish every word, tightening the knot in my chest. When he finally leaned back, waiting for my answer, I reached into my bag. I laid a single envelope on the counter and slid it across the smooth wood. He frowned, pulling it open. The color drained from his face as he scanned the words. A cease and desist order? I didn't say a thing. I didn't have to. Behind me, Mr. Calder stepped forward from the office doorway where he'd been waiting. He nodded once, calm and deliberate. Rowan's mouth opened, but no words came. The silence filled the room, heavy and undeniable. He folded the paper slowly, eyes darting between us, then shoved it back into the envelope with a shaky hand. For the first time, he realized I wasn't bending, and that's when his mask of confidence finally slipped, leaving only the cracks beneath. After Rowan left with the cease and desist order tucked under his arm, the shop floor felt different, less like a place under siege, more like a ground I was ready to defend. The next morning, as the crew gathered for our usual briefing, I noticed their uneasy glances. Finally, Carlos, who had been with me since his trade school days, stepped forward. "Mrs. Quinn," he said carefully, "we thought you should know. Rowan's been talking to people, clients, vendors. He keeps calling Quincraft a family-owned legacy like he's in charge. Some of them asked us if he was taking over. The words hit me harder than Rowan's threats. Family-owned legacy. He was reshaping the story of my life, cutting me down to a supporting character in something I alone had built." Ellie, my floor manager, pulled out her phone. "Look," she said. Scrolling to screenshots of social media posts, Rowan smiling with potential customers' captions like, "Carrying on what Mom started," or "Next Generation Leadership." He'd tagged Quincraft in everyone. One by one, the staff began to share. Emails he'd sent vendors messages where he promised discounts in exchange for contracts. Even a voicemail where he pitched himself as the future face of the company. By the time they finished, I had enough to fill a binder. I thanked them quietly, heart-pounding. These weren't just my employees, they were witnesses to the truth. Some of them I had mentored from their first cuts of raw lumber to polished cabinetry. They knew my story because they'd lived it alongside me. That afternoon in Calder's office, I spread the printouts across his desk. He flipped through them, his lips pressing tighter with each page. "This isn't just arrogance," he said finally. "This is a coordinated attempt to claim ownership by perception. If you hadn't acted, he might have convinced people it was true." I stacked the pages neatly, slid them into a thick folder, and closed it with a snap. I had proof now, more than enough to fight back, not just with words, but with undeniable evidence, and I knew exactly how I would use it. I walked the length of the workshop late that evening, the air still heavy with sawdust and varnish. My hand trailed along a chair frame pushed against the wall, its oak arms worn smooth by decades of polishing. I had designed that chair 20 years ago, when Quincraft was nothing but a rented unit with cracked windows and a single workbench. I remembered sketching the outline on butcher paper, then shaping each curve by hand, falling asleep under my desk with the blueprints spread across my chest. Those winters were cold enough that I sometimes woke to see my own breath, but the thought of quitting never crossed my mind. Piece by piece, I built the showroom sanding boards until my palms blistered, hauling furniture through the snow in borrowed trucks, watching every penny so I could buy the next set of tools. That chair and everything around it carried the truth of my story in its grain. Rowan had never touched it, never felt the weight of creation. I sat at my office desk and pulled a legal pad toward me. The words came steady, deliberate. I drafted a letter addressed to our vendors, partners, and clients. I laid out the facts. Quincraft was mine, built from nothing by my own labor. No family member had ownership or management authority. Any claims to the contrary were false and unauthorized. Then I set the boundary. As clearly as the edge of a blade, this was my business, my livelihood, and no one else's legacy to claim. With Calder's review, the letter went out the next morning, posted online, and emailed directly. By the end of the day, I could see the ripples spreading. Local business groups were sharing it, tagging Quincraft as a story of resilience and integrity. Vendors called to confirm their support. Clients reposted, adding their own experiences of trust and loyalty. For once, the narrative wasn't Rowan's to spin. It was mine, told plainly and without apology. And as the messages of solidarity poured in, I felt the ground steady beneath me, firm enough to face whatever Rowan tried next. The fallout came faster than even I expected. Within days of my letter, the quiet murmurs about Rowan turned into open questions. Vendors he had approached pulled back, no longer returning his calls. Clients who once entertained his charm began to avoid him, citing confusion about his role. His carefully cultivated image as the dutiful son stepping into the family business unraveled thread by thread. At a Chamber of Commerce luncheon, I overheard his name whispered with pity rather than admiration. He thought he could just take over. Someone said at the next table, their voice low but not low enough. Turns out it was never his to begin with. By the following week, even his realtor friends stopped promoting his so-called expansion plans. Without the illusion of legitimacy, Rowan had nothing to stand on. And I kept working, focusing on orders and staff meetings, reminding myself that silence was often the sharpest answer. But then one night, as I checked my email before locking up, I saw his name in my inbox. The subject line was bare. I'm sorry. The message was short-typed, hastily. I was just trying to be part of it. I never meant to hurt you. Maybe we can find a way forward. I read it twice, the ache of those words, cutting deeper than his demands ever had. For years I had carried him through storms of his own making. Now he wanted to fold himself into the story of my survival, as if intention erased action. I didn't reply. Instead, I attached the message to the growing file I kept with Calder and hit forward. Let the words stand as evidence of what he had done and what he now admitted. When I shut the laptop, the silence felt different, not heavy, but final. Rowan's story had collapsed without me lifting a hand, and I no longer carried the weight of proving mine. The store, my staff, my clients. They were intact, stronger than before. And I knew the time had come to close this chapter for good, so I could step into the next with nothing left unfinished. I arrived before sunrise, unlocking the glass doors as the street outside was still quiet. The shop smelled of fresh sawdust from yesterday's cuts, a scent that had followed me for decades and still felt like home. Inside the showroom gleamed under the soft light rows of finished tables and chairs, waiting for the hands that had ordered them. This was the life I had carved out, not inherited, not borrowed, but made plank by plank. One by one, my team filtered in. Carlos carried a box of hardware, Ellie brought her clipboard, and someone set down a steaming cup of coffee on my desk without asking if I needed it. They didn't say anything about Rowan or the letter. They didn't have to. Their presence was enough, each of them, a reminder that this store had always been about building something together, not about pretending legacy where none existed. I opened my drawer and pulled out the envelope with Rowan's final message. The words no longer hurt the way they had the night before. They were simply part of the record evidence of a choice I had already made. I slipped it into a folder marked closed and shut the drawer firmly. Some stories don't deserve to be rewritten. They deserve to be finished. The morning moved quickly. Orders, packed deliveries arranged, a client coming in to approve a custom piece. I walked through the workshop, running my hand along a newly built oak table. Its edges smooth, its joints solid. Clean wood, steady hands, honest work. That was what remained. That was what endured. I stood a little taller as I looked out over the shop floor, the hum of saws starting up, laughter rising from the crew. No shadows of guilt clung to me anymore. Rowan's story had ended with his silence. Mine carried forward with every nail set, every order filled, every life I touched through the craft I had given my years to. And as the day began in full, I knew this was exactly where I was meant to stand.